After experiencing a devastating tragedy at the hands of ruthless invaders, a woman with extraordinary powers exacts revenge on those who did her wrong. One night, Olena runs across a dark forest, her white dress covered in blood. Soon, the scared woman happens upon an ominous apartment building, and she stops to calm herself down. Suddenly, a frightening floating figure grabs Olena by the neck and lifts her off the ground. Then, the being utters her fiance's name, Andriy, in a deep, unsettling tone. Eventually, the woman wakes up and realizes it was just a nightmare. Seconds later, she looks at Andriy's framed picture on the bedside table. When she checks under the covers, she finds her fiance's dog, Ozzy, beside her. In the kitchen, Olena smiles when she sees the man preparing breakfast. Then, Andriy takes the woman in his arms and they dance in the middle of the room. Suddenly, the coffee on the stove boils over, interrupting the sweet moment. So the man says he needs to leave soon because he'll be late for work at the store. After sharing a kiss, Andriy heads to the shower and Olena feeds Ozzy. Moments later, she calls her aunt Yevdokia, who jokingly responds that she doesn't recognize the caller since her niece hasn't talked to her in a while. However, the older woman says she understands because Olena's busy with the preparations for her upcoming wedding. Eventually, the worried niece tells Yevdokia about her dream and says death is coming for them. The aunt counters that the seals wouldn't allow it, but Olena says it can happen because she senses a reverberation of the force and the being called Andriy by his name. The older woman thinks it's a sign for Olena, and the best thing to do is to send her fiancé away. She asks where she should send the man, but because she doesn't have an immediate answer, Yevdokia says she'll call back later. That evening, Olena prepares a special dinner for Andriy and suggests they go on a trip together. Then, the couple shares a kiss and they head to the bedroom to make love. The next day, the concerned Olena watches news reports of foreign invaders encroaching on their home city of Konotop. From the window, she watches enemy soldiers forcing local activists inside a van. Soon, the woman and her fiancé take Ozzy and they sneakily head to their car to escape the tense situation. In the vehicle, Andriy says he's taking Olena to Frankivsk to lay low while he returns to the army. Suddenly, he sees an enemy tank blocking the road, so he makes a U-turn. As he checks for alternate routes on his phone, the woman says she'd rather stay with her aunt and assures him that she'll be safer there. While making their way toward Yevdokia's house, an enemy soldier flags them down, so Olena begs the man not to pick a fight. As the entire troop surrounds the car, Andriy calmly explains that they're civilians who have nothing to do with the war. Even though the pair insist they're on their way to an aunt's house, the soldiers step away for a moment to discuss their next move. One man says they should take the car because theirs broke down, and they could also take advantage of the clueless woman since none of their actions during wartime will have repercussions. Andriy senses something amiss when the troop returns to the vehicle, so he takes out his pistol and fires at the enemies. Then, he drives off in a hurry while the armed men shoot at them with their rifles. When one soldier tries to jump on the hood, he runs over his leg and continues down the road. The chief asks if any of his men are injured, and the others confirm one casualty. That evening, the couple arrives at Yevdokia's house and the woman hands the injured dog to her aunt. However, she notices that her fiancé hasn't gotten out of the car and realizes that the man's been mortally wounded. She tries to help Andriy walk towards the house, but he falls to the ground. Desperate, Olena tries to save her fiancé's life with a spell, but she witnesses death collecting Andriy's soul and she wails in anguish. The next day, the distraught woman cleans the blood off Andriy's lifeless body with a damp washcloth. Yevdokia asks her niece how she's doing, and the latter says that even though she's lived dozens of lives, witnessed hundreds of wars, and seen thousands of deaths, she's never felt worse. The aunt assures her that she'll be alright, but Olena says her life will never be the same without the man because she loved him so much that she abandoned her powers, revealing that she's a witch. She vows to exact revenge on those who killed Andriy and promises their deaths won't be peaceful or quick. Then, the furious woman uses an axe to break down a wall hiding the entrance to her den. Moments later, Olena undresses in front of a mirror and cuts incisions on the magical shackle tattoos on her wrists, implying that she wishes to harness her powers once again. Concurrently, the squad leader tells his men that their food supply has been compromised, but they've been given the green light to expropriate from the locals with no consequence. Later, the chief hears Ufa and Rusik bickering about the former's ethnicity, so he orders the men to head to town to get food. Eventually, they enter a property and the homeowner tries to scare them away with an axe. However, the armed men easily subdue him him and terrorize his daughter, Katya. The woman tries to run away, but one soldier knocks her down to the floor. Then, they hold the helpless captive down on a table and take advantage of her. Outside, a woman tries to stand up to the soldiers, but her cutting words only prompts Kalash to shoot her dead. Later, the troop returns to the campsite and the leader asks why they brought Katya along, so they explain that the others might want to have some fun with her as well. Meanwhile, the witch wipes blood off the car and places the cloth in a chalice. That evening, one soldier starts throwing up a clump of hair and a dark substance. Then, he pulls out a piece of paper from his mouth with the phrase, "These woods will be your grave," written on it. Suddenly, the bandages around his shin begin to soak with blood and he exclaims that it's as if his body is tearing itself from the inside. The medic tries to save the man, but after several agonizing seconds, he takes his last breath and perishes, much to everyone's confusion. The leader asks the medic what happened, but the latter says that the only conclusion he can come up with explaining the sudden demise is a heart attack. Because he senses something strange happening in the woods, the chief orders Bandos to take the civilian back to town. Later, the despicable man drops Katya off by the edge of the forest and tells her to walk the rest of the way home. He adds that she better keep her mouth shut regarding what happened or they'll decimate her entire town. After Bandos drives off, Olena happens upon the helpless woman on the road and asks if she wants to exact revenge on the tormentors. Inside the tent, the leader has a nightmare where he's wandering around the maze-like den, and the witch tells him that he and his men are all going to die. Then, Bandos urinates a blood-like substance, perplexing and horrifying him. Concurrently, Olena casts a spell on Owl and makes him fall asleep. Just as she's about to end his life with a blade, she changes her mind when she sees a picture of his wife and child. Moments later, Roller hears a noise in the trees and realizes it was a crow. Suddenly, he finds cash scattered on the ground and calls out to his companions. However, the man hears the witch's voice telling him not to alert the others because they'll take the money away from him. Olena points out that there's more cash on the ground, so Roller excitedly gathers the bills. The next day, the entire troop receives a text message stating, "These woods will be your grave." So the chief explains that it's the enemy's tactic to scare them. Then, one soldier shows the leader a shrine he found with wooden dolls strung up on tree branches. Soon, the group realizes that Roller's missing, so they follow his tracks along the snow to try and find him. To their horror, they see the shirtless man tied to a tree, his mouth seemingly sewn shut. Several feet away, the witch stabs a doll with a sharp stick and bites down on its torso. Concurrently, bleeding injuries appear on Roller's body, and when the medic runs to try and save him, the tethered man explodes, sending viscera flying everywhere. Then, the chief sees a fishing hook on the medic's pant leg and realizes whoever was responsible laid a concealed trap and rigged a grenade to explode if anyone approached Roller. In the den, Olena breaks a vase, releasing more power for her to harness in her quest for revenge. As she lies on the floor, a terrifying creature wraps its arms around her body, and its soul enters the witch through her mouth. While hanging the laundry outside the house, Yevdokia sees dark clouds and ravens dropping dead from the sky. In the den, the witch wraps string around the picture of Al's wife and child. The aunt warns Olena about using the dark force, but the determined woman tells her to mind her own business. Yevdokia says they're family and she can't just stand by and watch her turn into a monster. The witch counters that she is already a monster and she knows what she's doing because she's been alive for hundreds of years. The older woman begs Olena to stop because the darkness will eat her alive and she'll never be herself again. However, Olena says she doesn't care what happens to her because all she wants is revenge. In the campsite, the soldiers place Roller's remains in a bag and throw his body in the mass grave along with the other casualties. Then, Al receives a picture of his wife and child's lifeless bodies, so he asks the chief if he can use the vehicle to get to town for better phone service. The leader asks to see the picture, but the soldier says it won't load due to poor service. The officer surmises that the photo was another scare tactic by the enemy, and he believes the moment Al drives away from the camp, he'll get ambushed by a hit squad, just like Roller. The others burn the wooden dolls in the fire and they wonder why the flames are green. Moments later, the distressed man receives even more disturbing images of his dead family, so he drives the tank despite the chief's orders for him to stay put. From inside the vehicle, he sees the witch taunting him about his wife and child. In his delirium, the man drives the tank over the tent, instantly killing several of his comrades. That night, the soldiers beat Owl up because there were no pictures on his phone contrary to his claims, and his deranged behavior resulted in the deaths of their companions. experience. However, the man insists he wasn't in the right state of mind because the woman was messing with him. The next morning, an aerial attack from the opposing army causes the group to scatter around the woods. The disoriented Kalash searches for the others through the smoky haze, but the old woman he shot from the village appears before him as a ghost. He apologizes for what he did and reasons that it was an accident, but the frightening spirit chases the man through the trees. Moments later, the spooked soldier falls over and tumbles down a hill. Then, the chief finds him lying on the ground and assures him that he'll be okay. However, Kalash sees the officer use a small clump of hair and blood to write something on his forehead, and he realizes that the person before him is the old woman that he killed. Eventually, the rest of the squad finds the lifeless man with his heart ripped out of his chest. Rusik theorizes that a wild animal must have attacked him, but the leader points out the symbols on the dead soldier's forehead. In the den, the witch feasts on Kalash's heart, and the concerned Yevdokia begs her to stop. However, Olena says she needs to do it because she has to fuel her powers. The longer the woman allows the dark force to take over her body, the more detached she becomes from who she used to be. The witch promises to leave once she's reached her objective and tells the ant to stay away for the time being. At the campsite, the medic confirms that Kalash's heart was ripped out, but the chief still believes that enemy soldiers were responsible. Then, the medic shares that his mother grew up in the area and told him stories about the witch of Konotop. However, the officer thinks he's crazy for blaming their comrades' deaths on a witch and insists that an enemy hit squad is hunting them down one by one. The leader says none of them are going to sleep tonight until they catch all of the perpetrators. Soon, a thick white smoke rolls into the campsite and the group sees Olena telling them that they're all going to die. Eventually, the haze causes all the men to fall asleep until the morning. The next day, the chief makes sure that there were no casualties last night, but they find that all the body bags in the grave are empty. While the others head out to investigate where the bodies went, Bando stays at the camp because he isn't feeling well. When the man urinates, a centipede emerges from his member and he cries out for the medic, but he's all alone. The horrified man stumbles to the car and drives away from the camp. Meanwhile, the troop stops by a tree in a clearing and sees the remains hanging from the branches and crows feasting on the rotten flesh. The religious owl believes this is a sign that they don't deserve to live, so he points his rifle at himself and takes his own life. The chief sees the witch in the distance and orders his men to fire their weapons in her direction. Concurrently, Bando seeks help from Katya, but the woman grabs an axe. The man begs for forgiveness for what he did to her, so she lowers the blade sympathetically. However, when the soldier tries to slyly grab his rifle, the woman chops his hand off. Then, Katya swings the axe and brings it down on the man's head, ending his life. The witch returns to the house and asks Yevdokia to remove the bullets from her body. The ant learns that Olena grows weaker each time a soldier dies, and she worries about what'll happen to the woman once the last man perishes. As Yevdokia takes the bullets out from the witch's back, she says she senses something amiss. Meanwhile, the squad sees the witch's blood in the snow and thinks they'll catch her sooner or later. However, the medic says he doesn't want to incur the woman's wrath and would rather go home. But when he walks away, the chief shoots him dead. Eventually, the group finds the house, and the chief tells Ufa and Rusik to check the perimeter while he and Rabbit investigate the house. Inside, the officer sees the hole in the wall leading to the witch's den and enters. By the well, Rusik insults Ufa about his ethnicity and a scuffle ensues. At first, the bearded man has the upper hand, but his opponent eventually places him in a headlock. Seconds later, Ufa lets him go and points out how people like Rusik always think they're superior to others. However, when the victor turns his back for a split second, the opponent shoots him, ending his life. In the den, the pair see their injured reflections in the mirror and the officer says it's just a trick. Suddenly, they hear the woman's voice from behind a shelf of jars, so Rabbit fires in her direction. However, the liquid inside the jars splashes onto his face, melting his flesh. When he begs the chief for help, the older man orders him to stay away and shoots him dead. Seconds later, the leader sneaks up on Olena and hits her from behind. Then, he pins her down on the table and takes advantage of her, excitedly stating that he's never made love to a witch before. Suddenly, the real Olena appears beside him, and to his horror, he realizes that the person he was doing the deed with was Rusik. The woman knocks the officer to the floor. Then she rips out Rusik's throat with her bare hands. Yevdokia appears and begs the witch to stop, and when the latter refuses, the ant says that what she sensed while taking the bullets out of her body is that she's with child. The older woman explains that she can't throw her life away because she still has something to live for. Suddenly, the chief grabs Yevdokia and threatens to shoot her if the witch doesn't stand down. However, the weapon malfunctions, allowing the woman to shake free from his grasp. Just as Olena's about to deliver the killing blow, she hears Ozzy's bark and sees her pregnant reflection in the mirror. Conflicted, the witch doesn't know if she can just let the soldier go because he might come back and bring more grief. So the older woman says there are other ways to deal with a man without killing him. Later, they return the traumatized officer to the campsite with his dead men in body bags hanging in the trees. Soon, the local army happens upon the area and arrests the man whose deranged mumblings about a witch make no sense. 9 months later, Olena holds her newborn baby in her arms, thankful for Andriy's unexpected gift that gave her the will to live.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.